In one of your earlier podcasts, and oh, by the way, thank you for putting your podcast out in transcripts because I'm a very visual person. So I find it much easier to read the transcripts. They're great. So thank you
Ah,
for that.
y-
In one of them, you mentioned Rolf Debelly's book about thinking. And Rolf Debelly's done another book about something that I've been wondering about for a long time. And he wondered about it more and got there faster about not reading newspapers, not reading news, because he feels that it doesn't give us. Rolf Debelly, and I guess you want to look much deeper into our world and our society and kind of dive down and try and understand the whole thing. But the news we get is so superficial. No disrespect to Taylor Swift, but really, situation in Ukraine, Taylor Swift, no disrespect to the lady, good luck to her, but really, are they of equal import? I think not really. He feels that if we don't watch the news, he feels we're just endlessly distracted by little sound bites and things. And I think this is true. And I feel it happening to me, really. And he feels that not going cold turkey can be a bit grim. I look at the news for about 5 minutes a day now, really. And one of the things he does is he goes back to pivotal times, maybe 2008, maybe the 90s, something big happened. And he says, this was the news that day. And you wouldn't have known the import of what was happening historically. You just wouldn't have known it, really. So it's hard for us to not be distracted by the superficial and then keep going deeper and deeper, really. It's hard.
and I think social media has taken that to a new level. I'm with you. I know what you mean about being very visual. I don't have enough time to read anymore. I listen to a lot of books. So when I'm on a dog walk, when I'm cooking or something, I'll have on a book, or when I go to the gym. So I'll get through quite a few audiobooks. Last book or the book before last was I read Rebel Ideas, Matthew Syed. I don't know if you've come across it. It's a brilliant book and it argues a lot of the points that I want to argue
Yeah.
about diversity of thinking. It's not just everyone having a say, but it's about the sources of diversity of thinking that are important. So a book like that, I then have to go back to on Kindle and start taking bits out. A good book I'll read twice. I deliberately didn't look at news for a long time. This is strange because I've just downloaded the Telegraph app because
Yeah.
my daughter's about to start and working there. She's a journalist
Okay.
and she's
Yeah.
starting there on Monday. And she is because we had a gap between her finishing uni and settling in, and we may have gone away. But one of the reasons she didn't want to was she wanted to vote, and she hadn't sorted out a postal vote. And she said no. She said no. I can't complain if I can't vote.
Yeah.
Yes, so she is. I can't remember what my point is, but yeah. So my belief has always been, the first time I ever voted was when my daughter was 18. She wanted me to drop her down the station. I thought, I'm here, I might as well vote,
Yeah.
because I've never felt that. I've always felt that the internal narrative I have has far more impact on my life than any politician. And I think that's the landscape that we navigate. And I never felt like one vote made much of a difference.
But it does to you. It does to you, Rob.
Yeah, but I always felt, I suppose I feel like looking at the news and voting, that kind of thing. First of all, I've never really fitted into any establishment. I started school and disagreed with the idea of it and never really fitted into an organization.
Yeah.
But I've always felt what happens is down to me. There are situations, I could be in a concentration camp, I could be in prison, I could be in a country where I don't have a say. But I'm a great believer in Viktor Frankl's quote that the last of our freedoms is our freedom to choose. I scan the headlines. I look for anything interesting. Half of it's news, half of it's football, and just to see what's going on. But I've always felt it was much more important, my actions, my choices, and how I navigate within the landscape that everyone else, I feel, has power over.
I completely agree. In terms of the Frankel thing, I think of it like a row of dominoes dropping. We hold power over the last domino, whether we choose it. Even if we were in front of a firing squad right now, you've got a choice. You can accept it or say, sod you, mate.
Mm.
There's a bit in the wonderful film Breaker Morant where Edward Woodward plays, it's a true story from the Boer War, and he's getting shot with his mates that up before a firing squad. And it's completely unfair. The whole thing's been rigged. He's a political scapegoat, totally. And he just holds a hand and he says, shoot straight, you bastards. So he's not accepting it. He's got, what is it? Hemingway said, a man can die but not be defeated. I think both can happen, but he chooses, he's dying, but he's not going to be defeated. He's just saying, to hell with you. He's not blaming the firing squad. They're just doing their job. But he's just
Yeah.
saying, the whole thing's a load of crap, basically. So yes, we all do hold that final domino. I feel a lot of people feel that they don't hold any dominoes at all. Have you come across learned helplessness? It came from the concentration camps, really.
Martin
So,
Seligman did a
yeah,
lot of work
yeah,
in that.
yeah, yeah. And because obviously a lot of American psychologists were Jewish escapees from Germany in the 30s. They spent a lot of time in the 50s trying to think, how the hell did this happen? Trying to understand what we now think of as social psychology. But I think nowadays a lot of people have, it's not the same learned helplessness, but it's a type of learned helplessness where they feel, what's the point in voting? Politicians are all the same. There's nothing I can do. And I think it's very important to combat it. One way I do it, very simple way, is picking up litter. I know that sounds silly, but if you pick up litter, it's a tiny little thing, but it is making a change, albeit minuscule in the world, but it is reinforcing the feeling that you can actually make a change no matter how tiny. You have a choice whether to pick it or not pick it up. You've got that choice. Similarly, if you see, say, a guy who's just sitting there begging and you say hello, it's acknowledging his humanity. Whether you give him money or whether you don't, or give him a sandwich is another issue. But just saying hello makes a big difference because those people feel that they're in a bubble and they're dehumanized. They don't even exist as people any longer, really. If you go out canvassing or something, it's pretty easy to feel like a non-person quite quickly, really. So I think these tiny little actions that we can do are a way of us saying, I reject learned helplessness. I'm in this world. I can make a difference, however small.
Yeah. I suppose I never felt helpless. I just felt that it was under my control. I felt the largest part I could control. But I think your point about picking up litter, I think it was Rudy Giuliano when he was first, was it New York?
Oh, well, he's the mayor of
Oh,
New York.
was it? Yeah, I'm not sure if it was him, but he made a huge difference. And it was by clearing up the graffiti in New York. And it had a dramatic difference on crime figures, on lots of things. It was explained by when people saw graffiti, they saw litter, they thought, oh, it doesn't matter. This is
Yeah,
what you do. That becomes the norm.
yeah, it does.
And once it was cleaned up and people saw that everywhere, that we were having pride in it, people started taking pride in their environment. And then that became the norm. It goes back to the Kitty Genovese study, where along those lines, where Kitty Genovese was a case where someone was being raped and murdered. Lots of people in the neighborhood heard her screams for hours, and everyone assumed someone else was going to take action, and no one did, and she was killed. And it was prolonged over 8 hours or something, that anyone could have stepped out and helped.
Yeah.
But because everyone else thought, oh, someone else will deal with it,
Yeah.
no one did. I'm trying to remember, but that came out of the social psychology. I see that we have a shared love and we began from psychology.
Oh, I did have a vexed relationship with it and probably always. I mean, I used to be a psychologist, so it's his hand up. Shoot me. Oh, God. I'll tell you my own little experience, but I'd be really more interested in yours. I did experimental psychology as a first degree a long time ago. I completely disagreed with it, really. Not with experimental psychology, but the take then from psychology, I'm going all the way back to the 70s now because I'm very old. Psychology, what I did was then regarded as part of biological sciences, kind of biology, really. So it wasn't about people. It was just about kind of physiological processes, really. It was very reductionist, very behaviorist, and in my view, very silly, really. And I just thought this whole thing's bonkers. But psychologists went along with it for careerist reasons. They wanted to be taken respectably. They wanted to be seen as a science. So they based themselves on Newtonian physics, which was great, apart from the fact it was about years out of date with quantum mechanics. So because they saw physics as the most respectable of the sciences and psychology as the youngest. So they were trying to suck up to a model that didn't exist. It was obsolete, shall we say, really. So I disagreed with it. I felt physically ill after doing psychology. I didn't read another psychology book for about 7 years. And when Isink's book, if you said at the time to psychologists, I'm studying because I'm interested in people, they would literally laugh at you. They would laugh at you and put you down. They were really horrible. They said, no, it's not about that. It's about scientific study of behavior and stimulus response behavior, really. There was nothing more. There was no Shakespeare. There was no Aristotle. Forget those guys. We're studying behavior. And then 7 years later, Isink, who was regarded as the chief psychologist, put a book out saying psychology is about people. And I thought, you hypocrite, you flaming hypocrites, you've gone along this line and then you just jumped to something else. What? So anyway, that was psychology version 1 for me. I went out and ran a small business and got into all that stuff. And then I sold my business, went to business school. I had 2 years out that I could learn and reinvent myself and stuff. So the first year was business school. And the second year I did a thing in organization development, which was about organizations going through change. That was started by a bunch of people who were like me, 20 years older. They being dissatisfied with psychology in the late 50s and early 60s. They're Americans, and they'd wanted to go much deeper. And they'd also wanted to address real world issues. Because I thought, what's the point? The world's full of people. If psychology is about people, then shouldn't we be looking at things in the real world? So those were my two experiences of academic psychology. Unfortunately, the master's degree is a bit of a waste of time. It was far too theoretical, really. But once I left that and went out and actually was doing organization development, then like you, it was saying, how do we make organizations better? How do we make the world better? How do we help people lead more fulfilling lives? How do I manage my relationship with myself? The more real world it got, the more I switched on to it. But of course, to understand the real world, we need concepts. So we're constantly going through this little learning loop, really. Anyway, so that was tell me about yours, please. I hope it was happy or wrong.
I went as a mature student because I
It's a good thing to do.
fought my way against academic study, never worked at it, and basically chose subjects. I started A levels with economics, English, and maths. And the maths, for some reason, the two teachers were teaching the same side, and it was all about graphs, and it was very precise. Yeah. And I'm not precise, and I didn't like drawing graphs and things like that. So I skipped out of maths for politics. And then I got to the end of the year at economics, and I realized I was going to have to work at economics. So I switched to business studies, which was much simpler. I was able
it's much simpler and much more interesting as well, to me, in my mind.
Yeah, so I was able to bluff through that, but I didn't want to go to university. So I went out, I did the gym for 6 years, and then later went to uni. By then, my first daughter was born, so I didn't want to move about. So I decided late and I just closed the business down and went to the local university. So I couldn't do a straight psychology, but it was mixed with sociology. It was modular, and it also had some business modules, which I'd be interested to your take on that, because so I was doing psychology and I was doing sociology, and I got that. It was all the theories, the studies, and that was easy to put together. And then I was sat in business and I was like, there's no rigor to this. Where's the studies? They just talked about general theories, and I'm not doing a lot of business, but doing mostly psychology and sociology. How do you do this? There's no evidence. Where's the research? This is just talking about theoretical. I struggled with that. I would have hated to have gone and done an earlier degree, like psychology earlier. I didn't like behaviorism. I didn't like Freud. I didn't like any of those. There was still quite a bit at my time on personality differences and perception, attention, and intelligence, which seemed to be more political because there was a history of eugenics in America based on the intelligence quotient of cretin, Morin, all that kind of thing. There just seemed to be arguments against intelligence being genetic when the evidence was overwhelmingly that it probably was largely determined by genetics. So I wasn't so keen on psychology, but I loved social psychology. I loved the stuff we talked about pro-social behavior, relationships. But again, there wasn't a lot on relationships. This was in the mid to late 90s. Yeah. So I think it was 99 to 2002. So there wasn't so much like the Gottmans. It was Steve Duck, I remember, was the man mainly about relationships, but it wasn't that well developed. Martin Seligman was just becoming the president, and he'd just come out with Authentic Happiness. And a few years before Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi had published Flow. So it was a great time. I looked at psychology, and when it came to do your dissertation, everyone was looking at crime and alcohol and mental health. And I was like, these are the ways that people are broken, but where's the North Star that we're heading for? If we don't know how to make the ideal life, where are we going for? And I was quite lucky because the only previous thing was in the 50s. There was someone who had done about optimal living. I can't remember his name. But now suddenly there was a whole batch of positive psychology developing. And so I was able to study that, which then became my focus. I did think about doing a master's or going on, but I looked at, even then, the most dominant narrative or impact that psychology had was like behaviorist theory. It was just starting to get into evolutionary, and that looked like an interesting area, but there wasn't enough of the social. Also, I didn't feel like being an academic in psychology would make any impact. I felt it would be 30, 40 years later that anything you found would filter down into the general. And that didn't feel, I felt more like a balance of taking risks of not being evidenced, but using intuition and pragmatism would be more impactful.
I completely agree with that. That's the take that I took in my management books. It was saying, look, these are concepts drawn from experience. I think they're useful. They're not scientifically tested, but your chance of doing harm is very minimal. Give them a go. That was very much my take, really. But I'm saying I'm not an academic. They're not scientifically tested, but in my experience, they really do work in practice. Give them a go. And people seem to respond pretty well to that, really. So that's totally upfront and honest with them, really. Because the converse, I'll tell you what the converse is. The converse is stuff that works in the lab that doesn't work in the real world. That's the converse.
So much research is basically done on students. And we talked in another podcast. I know Paula had a lot to say about a lot of people are selling companies on evidence-based approaches, and the evidence is very shaky and it hasn't been properly researched. It's just taking a statistic and applying that.
It does feel that kind of evidence-based is the new logo to stick on stuff these days. I'd say evidence-based on certain evidence found in a certain way to a certain degree. For instance, years ago, there was a particular psychology company that specialized in psychological tests, psychometrics. They were British based and they went into the US. And they were going to like totally revolutionize things over there. See how that one works, guys. They got a bunch of high-powered sales guys and ladies out to sell their programs and their tests. And they created a test for these people to work out who'd be the best at doing it. Sounds good. They were the masters of psychological testing. They were the boys. They were getting a test for their own people. Result, crash and burn. Egg all over face. Learn some humility, guys. Learn some humility. I won't name the company, but it was regarded as the gold standard at the time. I don't know what they did afterwards and recovered. Hopefully they sat down and had a good long look at their own arrogance. I find this again and again as a kind of an arrogance. I got taught psychological testing by a lovely man called Dennis Child, who was then ranked number 5 in the world because they all ranked themselves. And he was number 5. He was number 5. And he was so humble. What I remember from Dennis was his humility. But a lot of times from psychologists and others at their ilk, I don't get any humility, really. If there's no humility, there's usually complacency and then arrogance. And then, of course, you're looking for confirmation bias and ignoring the rest. It gets a bit iffy.
Yeah, you can look at gravity, and gravity is pretty universal. The sun's going to rise tomorrow, but it still isn't proven. There's going to be one day, one example where that's not going to work. It's for something as foundational as that, when you get something that's so much more variables involved, all you're really dealing with is probability. And you can get more probability, but that's all you can do. It's like the election. Polls are notoriously flawed. There's so many reasons when you're dealing with people that you get patterns, and you can build up enough intuition, you can build up enough of a knowledge base that you have more probability. But in the end, all you can ever have is probability.
Yeah. I'll tell you a fun example of another incident in my career. Before I'd gone to business school, I'd run this tiny little cleaning company in Sheffield. And after doing the business school and the masters, I got a job at what was then, I'll not mention that they don't exist any longer, but they were the quote unquote the oldest management consultancy in Europe. They were based in Knightsbridge, in number 1 Knightsbridge Road, Knightsbridge House, number 1, the establishment. So I'd arrived. This little kid from the back streets of Sheffield, he's arrived. Anyway, they brought me in, and it was a kind of an odd recruitment. I said, I'm not really sure about joining you guys. It wasn't a ploy. I wasn't sure. And the more I wasn't sure, the more they wanted me, which I should have thought was a bad sign. But anyway. But they were developing a concept called competency analysis. The word competency we use, really, that's where it comes from. There was a guy called Biatzis. He had a book about it, which is, even there, don't worry, don't try to read it. Even they admitted it was unreadable and need to be rewritten. It's unreadable. Basically, his notion of competencies, and he's been this now, he's into emotional intelligence. He fled the stage years ago. But at the time, they were selling this evidence-based, and this is in the 80s. This was rigorous. And the competencies, they were like atoms of behavior, of atoms of managerial behavior, managerial atoms, really. I can't even remember what they were now, but it was like they discovered the atoms of managerial behavior and skills, managerial skills, really. It was rigorous. They threw all these tests, blah, blah, blah. But the whole thing was a crock of crap. For instance, they showed me, I think they had 52 transcripts of interviews. And I think I knew that there were 2 outstanding performers, and they in British Aerospace, I think. And they told me there were 2 outstanding guys and the rest were okay. And I speed read the transcript and said, it's those 2 guys, it's Carl and William. And they said, but you can't possibly know. You don't understand the competency model. I said, don't have to, I can just tell. And I also said they're successful for completely different reasons as well. William's really cognitive and Carl's just, he won't give up. It's really that. This whole evidence-based thing was just a crock, basically. And I didn't believe in it, which put me in a very embarrassing position in the company. They asked me to leave in the end. But 40 years on, we were left with a horrible word, competency, which is really a skill. It's nothing else. It's just a skill. But the whole basis of managerial atoms, that's just gone. That didn't exist. Because life's not like that. The reality of management is a mixture of psychology, sociology, business theory, and just the hell of real life of people doing stuff. And I think the best we can do is look at it with different lenses, different frameworks, different concepts, and look for patterns and say, hey guys, this is the best we can do. Does this stuff help, really? Do the products I'm devising help you? And if they do, run with them. If they don't, leave them alone, really. That's all you can do. That's all I can do. That's all anybody can do, really. So the whole academic side of things, nowadays in academia, it's publish or perish. They've got to get research papers out. Are they really adding to the weight of management knowledge? I would say not, in terms of useful knowledge, really. So I'd say what people like you are doing and lots of other people on LinkedIn that I see is actually helping people far more. That would be my view than what comes out of most academic institutions. Sorry, academics. Sorry.
Yeah, it seems a field that seems a little outdated, the model.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, is the young boy running around in Sheffield from tiny to going to do psychology, what led you to that, and what was the appeal? What was the promise?
Right, I'll tell you exactly. Because I was in Sheffield in my 20s. I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1950s. We lived in a little cul-de-sac outside Belfast, 4.5 miles outside Belfast, and there were mum and dad and 2 kids. So it was like a nuclear family, middle class, respectable, nice, great, good again. Right, the reality, dysfunctional family, dysfunctional neighborhood, dysfunctional society. My parents were good people, but they were unhappily married. My sister loathed me because I was a threat to her, really. And the neighbors wouldn't speak to us because we were the wrong religion. Crock of crap, basically. So I grew up in that. I grew up being a pariah, being a victim of racism, just because I was the wrong religion, guys. Obviously, when you grow up in this, you're in it because we're in our experiences until we find ways of conceptualizing them, making sense out of them. So I was in my experience. I grew up in it. And when I got into my teens, I was very academically bright. I'm not now, but I was then. I was very bright. I'm not now, but I was then. But in my teens, obviously, I started to, probably like you and many people, I started to critically evaluate the world I was growing up in, really. At that time, Northern Ireland was just blowing up into violence. And I escaped. I ran away to England. So I suppose I instinctively wanted to understand people because it seemed to me that the society I grew up in had just exploded, almost literally exploded. So I wondered what's going on, really? What's going on? But of course, I shouldn't have gone to university when I did. I was too young and all those things. You did the right thing going as a mature student, Rob. You really did. You get far more out of it. When I went back to business school 7 years after I graduated from psychology, I was a different person. I was a completely different person. I was able to study, think, get value, critically evaluate all those things. So,
yeah, you have a bit of experience to judge against. So I'm curious, that sounds quite a tough childhood growing up. And I'm wondering how that impacted you in terms of your character. And because it's those kind of experiences that shape how we see the world or how we react to the world.
They used to have this exam, the 11 plus, and I did it like a year early. So I just turned 10. After doing that, I got sent off to boarding school, and I was the youngest kid in the school, and I got bullied. And it's only in the last few years I realized the effect of that bullying, which was it wasn't that, as bullying goes, it wasn't that bad, but whatever. If I met those guys again, words would be exchanged, shall we say. They definitely would. So I was this like shy, nerdy little kid. And then I got into climbing, rock climbing. And the first day I spent in the mountains when I was 14, I was out for 14 hours on my own. And I didn't see a single soul all day. There was nobody else there. And I got in way over my head, totally over my head. And about probably hours 8 to 10, I should have died, basically. But I survived. And I think looking back now, that was when the shy, nerdy kid, some other person started to emerge in him, really. And over the next 10 years climbing, I probably should have died. I saved several people's lives. I saw lots of my friends die, tons of them. And I've known over 50 climbers who've died climbing, sort of thing, really. So it's a lot, really. You'd have to be a combat veteran to know that number of people, really. So that was a very harsh world to grow up in, really. So I think that probably changed me as well, really, from being this shy, bookish, nerdy kid to just having to survive, really, just having to survive.
Given that it's something so dangerous, what was the appeal climbing?
Oh, wow. Just goose pimples. Because when you're in the moment, you're in the moment, you're living. There's what is it? What's the quote? What's the quote? To be in the wire is life. The rest is just waiting. From the Carl Wallenda. There was a high tightrope act that they had. There was a family in the 50s called the Flying Wallendas. The whole family, and they virtually all died in the wire. But the original guy, Carl Wallendi, said, to be in the wire is life. The rest is just waiting. That was it. When you're giving it some, whoa, you feel alive. You just feel alive. I was bad at games, but if you're good at football, I knew a guy at school, lovely guy, and sadly died of cancer last year. And when Frank was on the field, you didn't watch anybody else. You watched him. He was in it. He was there. So he probably felt the same with me as football. So there must be things like that with you, Rob. There are with everybody. There are.
Yeah, I suppose football for me, when I was a kid, up until a teenager, I was just playing football, and I was lucky to be part of a great team that we had a lot of success.
You must have felt those moments when you're going for it, and it's just you're there. You're so in the moment. These are golden moments.
That was a great time when we had that, but we also had some success where we were in. I don't know if they still run it, but it used to be a police metropolitan five-a-side. So I remember getting to the final of that, it being so pressured and so much nerves that you didn't want the ball. I suppose that's the point that really determines the players who make it and those who don't. That we weren't ready for, or I wasn't ready. I don't think most of our team were ready for pressure. So there was a point where it was great. We loved it. Just being in that, I was just playing for fun. It was just scoring goals, winning by 15 goals, and that was the time. I suppose later on I got into boxing, and I never really got into boxing for long enough. My friend and I, we were like a couple of years boxing, whereas there were a couple just about a year older than us. One was going for the ABA tool. He later became British champion at his weight, and they'd been like 7 or 8 years. So we could never be at that level. But the feeling of one week you'd go in and you'd be winning, and the next week you'd come out and you'd be battered, and you just come home just with a headache and had to sleep it off. I suppose that was another time with that. But you clearly found something that was more longer lasting.
Yeah, it's lasted nearly 60 years. Climbing has changed massively. It's become far more mainstream. It's become safer. When I did it, it was for misfits and outcasts and outsiders, really. That was the climbing world, people who didn't fit into the normal world. And those people are still there. I'm still there. But I live on Portland. It's a huge climbing area. I live in a huge climbing area, and I'm partly responsible for developing it. I'm the second most prolific developer. But most of the people there, their values are totally different. To them, it's like they start in climbing gyms, and it's quite narcissistic. It's about photographs. It's about showing up on Instagram. Whereas to people of my generation, it's about the experience. You don't really talk about it to people, really. Just don't.
My daughter and her boyfriend, they were in Sheffield. They got into climbing. Yeah. Bouldering, they call it. My girlfriend's daughter she worked for a while in bouldering, sent her and her boyfriend, and they go down to the Peak District and they go to Lake District. They go all over climbing, very much into it. And then younger, 1, maybe 2, are quite into it, but more at the climbing club. It definitely seems to be something that's becoming much more popular.
It is. Bouldering, when climbing changed into something called sport climbing in the 80s and 90s, which was much safer, and then it changed again into bouldering, where you go out with your pads and it's just a few feet high. Although interestingly, there's a huge spate of accidents now with bouldering. Because it feels safe, people don't pay as much attention as they perhaps should do, really. They fall badly, and it can be. But objectively, it's the safest form of climbing that exists. It really is safe. It's a funny one. I was just thinking back to when you said about not wanting the ball sort of thing in the final. Have I banged on about that Yerkes-Dodson performance curve at all? Because I drive people crazy about it.
The name seems familiar. I think I've heard it, but if you explain.
Just a quick, this might be of use to people. It's given I have been bitterly critical of psychologists. It actually is one of the oldest laws in psychology, and it's really useful. It's basically a curvilinear relationship between, I'll call it arousal, but the arousal very quickly becomes anxiety and performance, really. So there will be no anxiety, no arousal, no performance, because we're asleep. And at the end, there's no performance, but There's massive anxiety because we cracked up at the thing. But basically, if you think of it as doing exams, I used to know a lot of people who got really freaked out about exams and they'd be up working all the night before and all that stuff. And when they went into an exam, they were just a bunch of nerves. On the kind of arousal thing or the anxiety thing, by this time, they were getting close to the peak. So once the exam started, they tipped down the others. Their performance would just start to drop like a stone, really. Basically, it says that you get top performance with medium arousal. People don't win Olympic medals when they're half asleep. They're focused, but it's the right kind of focus, really. What happens to most people is they're fighting their nerves. You see this like in Wimbledon finals when it goes against people, they're fighting their nerves, really. So they've got hyper arousal, but the performance is dropping. Now, the people who win don't go down that thing. I remember watching, oh gosh, who's that Swiss guy? Who's the best tennis player of all
Federer?
time? Federer, sorry. Yeah, I hardly ever watch. My partner loves tennis, but I hardly ever watch it. But I think I saw one match ever. And he was obviously having a bad day against a good opponent. And he was just being broken down. And I remember thinking, nah, he can't come back. He was close to the end. I thought most people would have just given in, but he didn't. And he just stayed in the game, and then he fought back and he won. To me, that's the difference. That's what makes champions, really. He probably didn't have to win that. It wasn't that important. It was to him. Top performers become very good at staying in the low arousal state and visualizing what they're doing. And then they know once they're into the exam or into the match, or into the final, you're not going to fall asleep then, you're going to wake up. And then they're in that peak performance state and then they drop back again. There's a style of climbing called red pointing, which is longer than bouldering. And you have to master this to be a good red pointer. You have to be super relaxed. The minute you leave the ground, you either do it or you fall off. There's no injury. You won't get injured. You shouldn't. Some people, they will take 100 falls to achieve. Some people, it may be more, really. You can climb for 40 meters and fall off in the same place again and again. So it can be soul destroying, really. So you have to be super relaxed before you start. I've seen so many climbers beaten before they leave the ground. Now, you could apply that to boxers, you could apply it to tennis players, you could apply it to people at work.
That's really interesting. I never tried at school, but academic just suited me. Maths and English were my strong points. So I never really had to work at primary school. I got through school, whole of school, without doing any work by focusing on subjects that with general knowledge and being able to be and being able to do maths, that I could get through. Anything like science, I couldn't do because science requires detailed knowledge and I wouldn't pay that much attention. I couldn't do languages. I always knew from a very young age, I went into exams and I was like, I'm going to do this. And I looked around and I saw, and it doesn't matter how much someone knows, I'm looking around and I'm knowing that everyone is going to pieces from nerves. I never felt any nerves going in. Yet later, the only time I did study was at uni. At uni, I got the best marks in exams. I got a first in every exam, I think. But I never got a first in my degree because in the essays, I used to say, you got to show your thinking. I said, I am showing my thinking. They said, no, you've made leaps and you haven't shown one. I said, no, I'm showing my thinking. But they would say, no, you've made leaps. I could know the answers, so I could get the exams, but I couldn't explain it as well. I wasn't able to. I think I thought differently. And so that's been a perennial theme for me, that I find it hard to explain what's in my head sometimes. So I can see a clear.
But leaps are how we progress.
That's what I thought. They would say, no, you got to show this. And they said, you've made a leap. I never mastered it. So that was something that I never really was able to get my head around. I can see a clear line from the exams. I had no pressure. When I played football, I loved football. But what I loved more than winning or losing was running down the wing and knowing that I could go past someone, and knowing that sometimes I would just do it for fun, go back and back. It was the dribbling. And then when it got to that point on the five-a-side where you're really playing against good players and it became so much pressure with a big crowd and that watching it, that took the fun. It wasn't playing anymore. It wasn't playing around. It was about getting the result. And then when I think and I apply that, your graph, to boxing was all about overcoming the anxiety. It's terrifying to step into the ring for the first time. And there's a huge curve of being able to overcome that. And then when I think about, I did martial arts, and the martial art I got on best with was the one that directly taught you about fear, because I was in a lot of karate and I didn't like any of those kind of very traditional martial arts
What,
because
what were you in, like Shotokan or something like that in karate?
yeah, I think it was, and I basically did it because I wanted my daughters to have some kind of self-defense,
Yeah.
and I went with them, but it didn't seem real. There was nothing about it that felt that it was had any application outside. It was training for a dojo for specific moves. What happens, I think, to a lot of people who've done something like karate, unless they've done 10 years and really mastered it, what they do is they get a false confidence because they know what's coming. And when it's applied and someone isn't coming at them in the same way, first of all, the fear means that they lose the micro muscle
Yeah.
movement, they lose their calmness. And so they're not able to replicate the same things. This martial art taught by directly teaching you to deal with fear. And it worked on making you scared, making you learn to recover from being winded and those kind of things. So yeah, I can see a real application for that graph. And I think when you mentioned tennis and golf, I haven't played a lot of tennis, but I've played golf. Golf's quite a difficult game to learn, but once you learn, you can get around the course. And from then, often you don't get much better because of the tension. So I remember playing with my friends and we used to have little tournaments and that. And when you started winning, it would get into your head and then you've got to just be able to part or chip it in. And the nerves would mean that you just couldn't do it. I'm sure that's applicable in all fields. And I think in business, when they're coming to make a sale, when someone's making a presentation and in that real pressure, it's going to affect their ability to perform.
Yeah, it will totally. It does. It absolutely does. People go to pieces. They just go to pieces. But what the martial arts you found in the end was what was it, by the way?
It's a Russian martial art. And I don't know how much is true, but it's basically came from, they reckon it's the traditional Russian martial art, and then Stalin made it only that Spetsnaz units or something could do it. And so basically someone came out of one of the Spetsnaz units and
Yeah.
moved to Canada and started teaching it. And his mentor who was a colonel in the Russian army, and then there's different factions of them and they've
Yeah,
split
sure.
off.
Yeah, still split. Yeah.
It's very based in Russian Orthodoxy religion and the principles of that, of don't destroy the man, but destroy their aggression. And it's got the pragmatism of military, of do the least, it's not being able to compete for a gold medal, but being able to survive when you're injured, that kind of thing. There's no belts, which I found the belts systems, which is like a westernized version of martial arts, which is just basically a money-making thing. I left karate when we had this fifth dan or something come down and he was performing and he was berating everyone. And it was like a television performer, but everyone passed. And I was like, how can you shout at people, tell them, look, I'm so much better than you, and yet you pass everyone? Some exams, the tests don't have much validity unless someone fails.
No, yeah.
But yeah, so it didn't seem much point.
I think it is now. I did Shukagai for a few years, but then I just went back to climbing. I prefer climbing more. And when we went up a grade in a belt, you just used to dye your belts. You started with a white belt and you dyed it. But now people buy new belts, and the money that passes hands is, oh my God, really? Because the original notion was that you would start with a white belt, you would end up go to a black belt and then got the Dan grades. Because you washed it so much, your black belt would end up pretty much white. So the notion was you would come back. The notion is that a white belt was a complete beginner. So if you did karate for 30, 40, 50 years with the same belt all the time, that belt would just get so old and so frayed, it would go from black to white again, or pretty white. So the notion was you were still a beginner. That was the notion. So the original principles were in many ways wonderful, not applicable to fighting on the street, but in many ways wonderful. But it seems that it's become commoditized. Climbing has become commoditized, and virtually everything's become commoditized. And once you commoditize something, you just rip that soul straight out, and it's a money maker machine.
Yeah, it's a bit like going on holiday. You can go on holiday to a place that's unspoilt and have a lovely experience, and then you go back a few years later and it's a tourist area and it's just about taking money from you. We've become distracted in so many fascinating topics, but really like to make sure that we cover your journey. So if you could tell us a little bit about that journey from, you've covered a little bit of it, but from psychology to the organizations and the work that you do now.
When I went to business school, when I did the first, when I went back into education, it was brutal. There were 37 people started the course, 11 people finished. I came second. I would have come first. No, I wouldn't have come first. I couldn't understand that. The person who came first was an IT manager for British Telecom, but he was brighter than I was. But what was obvious to everyone was that Alan was super bright, but I seemed to have some sort of kind of finesse or maverick ability that other people didn't really. This is in the 80s. So I'd probably be I was looking at bigger pictures because in the end, back then it was like a military academy, really. And the notion was that if you're a successful manager, you could spend Friday on the golf course because it'd all be done. There'd be nothing to do. And I thought, geez, I don't want to spend Friday on a golf course. I don't want to. So this got me into change, the notion of change and how organizations could be better. I asked the guy who ran the business school and was an ex-management consultant. I said, well, what do management consultants do? And he said, like produce reports. And I said, do they get implemented? And he said, not really, no. So then this took me to change and organization development, OD. I'm actually supposed to be helping a guy with his book about organization development because he feels it has become commoditized too, really. But it was about really helping people through change processes. And I did this for years, but it was grueling. I destroyed my health. It was non-stop work. It was just incredibly absorbing. Trying to help an organization, not turn around an organization, but help an organization to turn itself around is just grueling. It's incredibly skillful. You're dealing with people at an individual level, a group level, intergroup level, all the way through the organization. It's like kind of 5-dimensional chess. It's really hard. Anyway, I burnt out on that. And I just thought I dropped out of the corporate world, even though I was massively successful. But I would have had a heart attack. I would have died. And I prematurely wrecked my health, prematurely aged. And I dropped out. I did projects on my own. I wrote 2 management books for a company called Gower. And the first got me a lot of work, which was nice. And the second one was just their big success story for the next 10 years, really, which was also nice. But then I got disenchanted with publishers. The notion of a journey is that we find places and then we see the bits that are good and then we see the bits that aren't good. Then we leave and then we go on. And I think that will apply to me, you, and many other people. It's in our natures to constantly search, to constantly go on, really. It just is, really. I mean, that SAS motto, always a little further, which comes from we're the pilgrim's master, we shall go always a little further, even to the last blue mountain. It's in our natures to do that, to keep going. I wrote a lot about climbing because I had a kind of reputation as a climber. I got into ghostwriting and helped a guy with historical books. And then the whole management book thing was like burgeoning. And then I got into helping people get their stories out, which is what I do now. But this is because I meet so many people who have got great ideas. Some people have dross, but some people have great ideas, but they haven't spent years writing. So they need help to articulate their vision, to get it out. And I don't want to write books for people. I want to write books with people, help them get their vision out. Recently, I helped a guy with a book about racism. It's at the publisher. It's a black guy in the UK. And it was a really eye-opener reading what he had to say. It was quite, we're white guys. It was shocking. It was like, this is what the world looks to a black guy in his 40s. This is the world. This is his struggle, really. So I think through doing these books, through helping people these books, it also forces me into getting out of any complacency and comfort zone that I might be tempted to get in. That's me, really.
Okay, so it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that directly, but when you say we go on the journey and we find somewhere we like, and then once we find somewhere we like, we find things we don't like, because that's very true. That's exactly what I noticed in relationships. We get into relationships because we're attracted to someone, we get along, everything's wonderful. And then people hit the bits where they're not getting along, where they find their differences, because we connect over how we're the same. And then we reach a point where we find we're different and they say they're just not the person they were, or I don't know who you are anymore, that kind of thing. And for me, the key to relationships is the ability to deal with the conflict, which is what happens at that point. And most relationships don't, because going back to psychology is we don't have a model for relationships or conflict that is relevant to the times we are now. So it feels like you're someone who's read lots of books, you've been seeking knowledge, and now in working with people, is that a progression? Because it seems that the appeal of helping people write their books or writing books with people is in what you're learning from that. Is that your why for
Yeah, it probably is. It's forcing me out of any kind of comfort zone I might be tempted to get in. Because I'm like classic baby boomer, people my age have been retired for years. I the hell with retiring. I ain't retiring. No, it's never going to happen. They'll drop dead in front of the laptop, and that's just fine. Because I'm trying to understand that little 15-year-old kid that everybody said, wow, he shows such promise. Years later, I'm still trying to understand the world because our world it's in ruins. It just is. It is. So it won't be my generation that fixes it. We haven't. We should have, but we didn't. But maybe this kind of baby boomer that just didn't give up. I'm still out there trying to make sense of it. When I'm creating new climbs on Portland, I'm giving something physically back to the world, even though it's just a little climbing world. So I refuse to give up, Rob. I refuse to give up.
That seems to
Sorry.
be a theme. You've mentioned that a lot of times in connection with Roger Federer, with the guy when you looked at the two transcripts, the
Oh
comment.
yeah, yeah, cool.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's been a few references. You mentioned it in connection with climbing. So never giving up, that kind of resilience, grit, that seems to be a core theme for you.
Yeah, I don't think about it because it's just me. It's probably easier for you to see me than me to see me, sort of thing. But yeah, probably is a quick tale. About years ago, this I tried to learn forex trading, for currency trading, really. And I got this kind of guru who was a great practitioner, but he was a terrible teacher, in my view, really. And he said most people burn out really quickly if they can't do this. I sat in a room for 9 years to crack it. And it was like 9 years out of my life, really, pretty much. And I did in the end, I won. I just wouldn't give in. I just wouldn't give in. Is that dumb? Yeah, I would say it is. That's pretty dumb. But we have to be true to who we are, Rob. I would not say to anybody else, behave like me, but it's right for me. I'm not giving in. I'm just not. That's the end of it. If I was going to give in at that day when I was 14 in the mountains, I would have given in and died then. And all those other years afterwards, I would have given in then. So it just becomes you're the guy that won't give in. However
So,
dumb it is.
so was that a formative decision at 14, or was that just the first example of it?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I think it was just a feral thing. For instance, I spent a year and a half in Liverpool with a guy. He was teaching me self-defense kind of thing. And he had a huge problem with me. I just wouldn't attack. I wouldn't attack, basically. I was great defending, but you don't win fights through defending. You need to attack, so if you have to. And he'd said once that if you get your hand on somebody's carotid artery, you've got 4 seconds before they black out. One day he grabbed me by my carotid, and I was thinking 4 seconds, and this shit with two down now. I was absolutely awful. I was at him. Now he was a sixth dan at Shotokan then and loads of other things. He could have stopped. He could have choked me out really easily. But what he was trying to do was to allow me to access that aggression, that will to survive in me, which we all have. And years later, somebody had done something very similar with him. A guy called Terry O'Neill, very famous guy, had done it with Keith, really. So I would think most of us have, if not all of us have that survive. The most dangerous killer will be a woman looking after a kid. The most dangerous killer you will ever get because their motivation will be 1,000%, really. They might not be skilled, but you won't stop it. You'll have to kill them to stop them, I think. Maybe that day when I was 14, it was probably that will to survive, really. But it took me away from being the bookish child who could live in this cerebral world, really, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so there was something that you mentioned a little while ago, that you're still learning about the world. The world is broken, it needs fixing. So what comes to mind, we've just had an election here yesterday. If you were to stand with a mandate for what needs to change, what would you be focusing on? If it was a TED talk or a book, what would that book be?
Oh gosh, I know what the answer is, but it's not right. It would, and this isn't a deliberately political comment. I would focus 100% on neoliberalism. The definition I would give of neoliberalism is where a government aligns itself with the markets. Capitalism isn't immoral; it's perfectly moral. It's not immoral, but it's amoral. Capitalism in itself will just keep going. The point of is money to capital to more capital. Benjamin Franklin said the point of time is to make money. So you get some more time and you make more money, and that's fine. But where does it end? So Keynesian economics basically had a split and said, look, the free markets are great, keep them free. But if we actually want better societies, if we want humane societies, we can't just do that. Government needs to be removed from this. It needs to be saying what kind of world we want, really. Now, I don't want to sound political, but in the last 40 years, we've gone way away from that. Neoliberalism has destroy this country and many other countries. And it's not me saying this, it's the International Monetary Fund, it's every man his dog saying it, really. And I think even old style Conservative MPs would totally agree with me, really. So I think neoliberalism has served us ill, very ill, because Oscar Wilde said it, people know the price of everything, the value of nothing. The whole point of neoliberalism is there is no value, there is only a price. There's only a price. So if it's karate saying it's about paying for your next black belt, it's just a black belt progression. It's not about the joy of a belt. It's about the money of a belt, really. If it's climbing, it's these young climbers, how much money can I make out of it? So everything comes back to money. Now, I'm not saying money is not important. Of course it is. But it means that things become commoditized. Education becomes commoditized. Everything comes commoditized. And I think Joni Mitchell said about paradise being a parking lot. We just trash it. So you go on your holiday to a lovely place, and it's not that it develops, that's fine, but it becomes trashed. So people move on to the next, so the whole world becomes trashed in every possible way. And that's what neoliberalism does. It reduces everything to just money. That's what I would attack, that notion.
It reminds me of the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
Yeah, where there's common land, and as soon as it becomes free to everyone is in fear of other people taking it, and eventually it becomes destroyed. It reminds me, we had a discussion on AI.
Oh, gosh.
And I was just taking in the point someone made is immoral, doesn't care, just you give it a goal.
It's really amoral. It's not neither moral nor immoral. It's just amoral.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I meant. Amoral, as in it doesn't care. You give it the goal and it will follow whatever the goal you give it. But it made me realize that the dominant model we have is an economic model, because once you have public companies, the only thing that matters is return on investment, which leads to short-term thinking. It leads to profits over people. And so that's the goalpost that we're going to be giving to AI. AI can replicate so much quicker. That then puts us in danger because we're not valued. Humanity isn't valued. The only thing that becomes valued is money. And then what is the money for? Because money is only a symbol for whatever. I remember John Gottman, the relationship researcher, he boiled down what people meant in arguments and discussions about money. And he stopped after 100 definitions. So money is freedom, money is security, money is safety, money is status, money is all of these things. And we're not defining what money is, but we're just placing money. And it's not really money that we want, because money only has any meaning while we give it meaning. As soon as, like, you look at Bitcoin, things like that, as soon as we change our definition of money, there could come a time when money is just left and no one uses it anymore. And yet we're feeding greed and just a greed for money for no other reason. That becomes very dangerous in the context of AI. So I can see what you're saying is because I think the way I see it is we're reaching breaking point because everything's been about money. And we've reached a time now where there's a qualitative shift from logistical work of making mining things to knowledge work, which is about people. And we have to access more of people. We have to access a greater level of clarity, a greater level of communication, greater level of emotional granularity. When we're still making it about money, we're not providing the conditions that enable that. So I think politically, economically, socially, we're reaching a breaking point in society. So I can totally see that and agree with that finding.
Just a silly example, in the 80s, I had a client called Alan. He was the managing director and had been the owner of an electronics plant. And the year before I met him, he'd sold his business and he made 6 million. His partner had also made 6 million. So Alan really was a $6 million man. So everybody thought he'd be wildly happy. 6 million was quite a lot of money back in the 80s, but he was totally miserable. His partner had a heart attack and died. The new owners of the company kept him on as MD, but they hated him because he was a maverick, really. His kids just got spoiled by the money, and his old mates just thought he's too stuck up for us. He wasn't. And he kept trying to put work their way, and they just ripped him off. I was the only person who could understand that. It was like, Alan, why wouldn't he be happy? He's got the 6 million. No. And I was the only person that could understand that the poor guy was totally miserable. His wife lived in permanent fear that they'd lose it all, which they did in the end, sadly. And he was just, it was almost because he had so much, he had more to lose. It's a bit like your game in the final. You're at the final, you got more to lose. So everybody saw the 6 million as how much he got, But I think he saw it as, I've got even more to lose, really. And he was miserable anyway. That's just a simple, silly, but simple example of money not doing Alan any good whatsoever at all.
Yeah, it was one of the most surprising things when I looked at lottery winners. A year later, most of them are more miserable. And it made me realize and really think that money is always a problem in your life. It's either you don't have enough or you
Yes.
have some and you need to protect it. But the more that you have, the more level of worry. And like you say, you have to worry. Then you've got, okay, look, what if the banks go bust? What if this investment fails? Where do I put it that it's safe? Yeah, I think it's coming to recognize that the myth of people is always, once I get this thing out of the way, once I get this. And the reality is there are certain things that are constant companions in life: fear, money, worries. All of those issues are just something that we have to come to terms with and navigate through all of life.
Absolutely. There'll always be something that can give us a sleepless night. There will always be something. What good are sleepless nights? They're not good at all. So I think exactly that. People think, instead of living in the moment and accepting the moment and working from the moment, even to something better, they think, when I get there, I'll be happy. When I get won't, because it'll be another moment. And we're like, we just follow the bread trail along. But the sad thing is people waste their lives doing that, really. That's the sad thing. So maybe that's something that people like you can help people with, to realize that the present moment is ultimately all you have and all you will ever have.
Yeah.
You can look back, you can look forward, and I have. Okay, you can look back, learn the lessons, that's fine. If you live in the past, you live in the future, you're throwing away your power. You're just completely throwing it away, really. You're just throwing it out the window.
The power of now. Someone should write a book on that.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
This is something I'm sure you'll probably come across as a book. Whenever you come up with an idea, so I moved from relationships to teams, and I thought, okay, what a great relationship is really is a team. Well, a great team has great relationships. And so I looked at applying that to teams, and I came up with this model, 5-step model. And then I thought, I wonder who else has done that. And Patrick Lencioni had we had pretty much similar. Mine was more focused on relationships at the beginning, and his was more on results, whereas mine was more on alliance, more as an individual journey. Pretty much covered the same topics.
This is really important. So did you feel that you'd been scooped by somebody else?
A little, but I looked at his final one. I think he's focused on results. And I thought, hang on, I'm doing it from an individual basis. So I didn't think he talked enough about trust. So I think his was trust. Yeah. His was trust, conflict. I can't remember now. 3 of ours were the same. But he talked about trust. I talked about relationships, because I think relationships are how you build trust. Whereas he said build trust, which I think you need to focus on the relationships. But his last step was focus on results. And I realized mine was a bit woolly. You develop the relationship, you bond as a team, but there isn't really an output. So what it taught me was to look at, I did feel that my model had already been done, but what it gave me was it showed me mine needed to be more focused on, okay, how did that benefit the organization? Because that was already done, I could focus then on, okay, what's the next stage? And then, which made me look at that I think there are 3 problems that create those, because he talks about 5 dysfunctions. And I think there are 3 problems that create those dysfunctions. So where his came more from an organizational basis, mine came more from an individual. So the pathway was slightly different. I don't know what he actually does, but I think it's from what looking at it, it looks like basically that model. Whereas mine is much more about relationships, and the model is how the relationships create that dynamic.
If you look back at something like the history of scientific discovery, you'll find again and again that people had similar thoughts at the same time. Oxygen was discovered by Lavoisier, and my brain's gone. It's that guy that wouldn't speak to, not Cavendish, wouldn't speak to anybody. Anyway, I can't. Was it Cavendish, Joseph Cavendish? Anyway, it was discovered by 2 people at roughly the same time. The periodic table was discovered by several people at roughly the same time. So it's the nature of discovery that different people have the same ideas at the same time. And you should never feel scooped by people, because your set of concepts will always be different. Don't be just 100% matched. So there'll be strengths and weaknesses in both of yours and things you can learn from each other. And it won't matter in any case, because some people will just prefer yours and some people will just prefer his. Don't feel like, oh God, it all got done before. It didn't. It just didn't.
No, Yeah, no, he was like 20, 30 years before me.
And
It
the
was,
scale of ideas, the time span of ideas, that's nothing.
I suppose because of the work, I've always feel that this is what I do in these is I'm trying to get the understanding of the person behind the profile. So it's
Yeah,
because there are lots of us doing the same thing. We're all talking about teams and lots of people are
yeah,
talking about leadership,
yeah.
but we all do it from our own flavor. And I think it's because of our individual experiences. Even with the same model, it's a very different philosophy and a very different approach because it is shaped in terms of writing a book. Pretty much you do find that there is, like inventions, ideas are ready at the same time, and like you say, there's so many examples of those people that come out with something similar at the same time.
Actually, I've just very quickly, I've just thought of an even better example. When I wrote my first business book about organizational change, and then I did another one, which they called 50 Essential Management Techniques. I didn't like essential, but I'd say 50 pretty useful ones. Anyway, it was in the publication process, down the kind of pipeline to be published. And this guy, Malcolm, who was the editor, he's one day sent me this clipping of a book, and I remember opening the envelope and my heart just sunk. I thought, oh, somebody's just written my book. It's just come out. I thought, oh no. It was a guy that he'd also done a previous book, so it was his second book too. And he's a legitimate guy. And I thought, there's no point doing mine now. It's just no point. Just it's busted. And then I thought, it's in the publication process. I don't, they pull things back and throw, what are they going to do? And I thought, oh, let them get on with it. But I thought, it's game over. It's game over. I think anybody would have thought that. Forget it. Right. The reality is, I never heard of that book again. I'd never heard of that book again. I hope the guy did do okay, but I never heard of it again. My book sold in 29 countries. And it was £46 a pop for a hard copy. And it was eye-wateringly expensive. Really, this is a long time ago, 46 quid. It sold in 20 countries. It was their bestseller for almost 10 years. They put out 4 competing titles. That was the way of thanking me, by putting out competing titles. All 4 bombed. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not saying mine was the best. I've no idea. All I'm saying is I thought I'd been scooped. I wasn't. And they put out 4 competing models, none of which worked. So I don't know any more than that, Rob. So I would say to anybody in a similar situation, don't give up, because in that situation, I was just, if they'd pulled it out and said, look, we don't want to publish, I said, fine, understand it. Just throw it in the bin, mate. Throw it in the bin. So you don't know. Let your readership decide that.
Yeah.
As long as people put out a book in good faith and said, look, I'm trying to help people. This is me. I'm trying to help people. Hey, it's over to you guys. And then I would say, let the market decide. Let people decide. Whether that's you with your stuff or anybody else with anybody else, let your customers decide. Some will like it, just let them decide.
So that moves us into what you're doing now. So I'm really curious about that. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is exactly that you're doing and the process of how that would work?
I think, first of all, I'm drawn to people who like helping people. I think that's the first thing. I'm drawn to people who like helping people because I like helping people. I think people like us are on a journey or are on our own journeys, and helping other people is part of our journeys too. So I think there's a natural alignment, myself with kind of coaches, consultants, public speakers, people like that, really. I'm less interested in just kind of industrial. I'm not uninterested, I'm less interested, because my fundamental notion always will be, how can we make the world a better place? When I grew up in a dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional neighborhood, dysfunctional society, the whole thing was several levels of dysfunctionality, and it all went to pot, historically shown. So how do we make the world a better place? And the only way, we're trapped in our experience until we get better ideas, better concepts, better lenses, really. Now, people have these, or they're working on them, but they're usually beset by doubts, imposter syndrome. Somebody's done it before. How do I get this out? Is it blog posts? Is it podcasts? Is it books? Is it whatever, really? And all I do is look on the book aspect of things, because not that it's just different from the others, but we still take books as the gold standard. We just do, because they've been around since the Gutenberg printing press. So I think we just do take them as the gold standard. We may not in 50 years, but we do now. So people look and think, how in God's name am I going to write a book? It was easy for me because I'd had years, and I'd done Malcolm Gladwell's thousands of hours before I ever began to write my first book. I'd done all that because I wanted to be a writer. But most people haven't, so they struggle. So I really reject the ghostwritten idea of just doing the book like a piece of margarine, producing it. When Ronald Reagan's autobiography came out, somebody asked him, he said, I'm really looking forward to reading it. So at least he wasn't hypocritical, bless him. But I don't want that. To me, that's the commoditization of books. I was talking to somebody recently, and no names, no practical, but they can basically be a #1 bestseller in the most prestigious newspapers on the planet. And I don't want to do that. Just don't want to do it. What I do is help guide people through the process. So somebody might have started writing the book, and I look at their writing and think we need to improve it, but it needs to be their personality. So I'm rewriting it, editing, rewriting. Somebody else will talk into a microphone and I get their transcripts and we look at it. Somebody else, I can interview them. But I'm trying to be a kind of like literary midwife, really, bringing their baby into the world. And I don't mind how it's done. I really don't mind how it's done. I want it to be as much of them as possible, which from a financial point of view is wrong, because the more of me, the more money they do, whatever. But I want it to be them. But my notion is that if we can bring out books into the world that really do matter, they don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be good, and they do have to be from the heart, really, with good stuff in them, then that's a way of helping our world to be a better place. I can't go back into organizations now. I'm too old and I'm too tired, and it would kill me. I just can't do that work anymore. And I don't want to do it. It would kill me. The guy with the organization development book, I mean, sounds like he's got health problems too, and because he's been at it for 30 years, so he's done his bit. So it's my positioning of myself to try and help other people, help the world to be a slightly better place. And we realize now that this applies particularly to work environments, because the days of command and control have gone out the window. That's gone forever, thank God. When I went to work, you shut up and did as you were told. Well, people aren't going to do that nowadays. Why should they? Not going to work. So any kind of emotional intelligence needs to be far greater for somebody now than it was for somebody then. So there's a lot of work for you, me, a lot of people to do. This is a big time, Rob. Our world is ruined and we need to make it better. That's our mission. That's our mission. And why shouldn't we have businesses doing it? There's nothing wrong in that. It's perfectly moral to charge people money, perfectly moral thing to do. But our mission, our journeys are about our development and our development of our world. That's what I think anyway. That's what I think.
It's interesting that you said about your book and you said it was expensive.
Was?
I look at, which is because we have an idea of what a book is supposed to be. But I've done courses, I've done all types of things. But when I really want to learn from someone, I think a book encapsulates, if not their lifetime knowledge, at least like a decade's. It's a significant lessons, and it's the most nutritionally dense material. You can read on articles, and we read a lot. You get headlines basically from social media or LinkedIn or whatever. But to really get an idea, you've got to have the idea, the branches, the roots, the trunks. And the only way you really are able to get that, or I am, is through a book. I'll take courses like if there's something technical and I want to be able to follow along, then a video works. But for me to change perspectives, to make those shifts so that I can understand where someone's coming from, I think that takes a book. And I suppose the problem is today a lot of people are not willing to pay the price of investing that time. I started off that I don't read as much because it takes that time. It's that it's like we have to pay the price to get the reward. And that for me, the best way of passing on knowledge.
Yeah. A good book is a distillation of somebody's life knowledge. The years and years of sweat and pain have gone into this. This guy Martin's book about organization development, he's been doing it for 30 years. It's full on. I'll tell you, every single day is full on. And he's knackered now. He may be too tired to write his book. I don't know. I don't want him to write it at the expense of his health, that's for sure. But if and when that book comes out, it's going to be a guy on the cold face for 30 years who spent his whole life thinking about this. It's his journey too. And it's going to make a huge difference. If and when it comes out, it's going to make a huge difference to people, that you're really getting a distillation, you're getting a concentration of wisdom and experience and knowledge that'd be very hard to get any other way. A TED talk, okay, 18 minutes or whatever, but you're not going to get that you can't do it. We need books. And yes, they do take time to read.
And to write. I wrote my book, and I first did it was a series of blog posts, and then I sold it as an ebook, and I wasn't going to do anything with it. And it was someone who was an early customer, and she was like, can I publish it? And even then, when it was written, but to reorder it and to go through the whole design process and it's just that, I think that's the bit about a book is the editing of going back. But it is a great way. In the end, you view it differently because
Yeah.
when you've gone over something so much, I'm guessing maybe it's different when you're working with someone else's book than when you're working with your own. Do you find that working with someone else's book is,
Yeah.
it's a bit like there's something too personal looking at your own, because you're looking at your own, and which is the editor has less bias than you, and
Yeah.
a fresh pair of eyes. Okay, so the right kind of person for you is someone who has some knowledge, they've been on a journey, and they want to share that with people. Is that right?
Yeah, probably. But I suppose my question would be, am I the right person for them? And it's for them to decide that.
Mm.
But yes, from my perspective, those are the people that I'm perhaps most drawn to, really. Yeah.
So your immediate question was, am I the right person for you? What I'm picking up, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you have this cookie cutter thing of we're going to make this book and it's basically automated. I think that you probably look through it and find a way of expressing the ideas and structuring the ideas and making it in the person's own voice.
It's got to be their voice.
Yeah,
It's not me, it's
yeah,
them. It's them.
in their own voice, and but you do that hard work is part of going through the book. Someone has to do the work, and I'm guessing that that is a large part of what you do. Is that when you say the right person, are you the right person for them? What distinguishes you?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Well, I'm different. I'm older. I probably thought about things more. I don't regard books as commodities. I won't just do the normal ghostwriting thing. I just don't want to do it really. So I'm definitely not for everybody, that's for sure. I can take people down the publishing route, but I'm not guaranteeing. I'm not going to fiddle their sort of best ranking. I'm just not going to do it really. That's not what I do. All I will do is help them get their ideas out honestly and directly into the marketplace and help them to market or get those ideas across their audience. One of the things you said was that your book came out of your blog post. What I constantly say to people is that when you're working on your books, you should be getting blog posts out. You should be putting bits of them on LinkedIn. They don't have to be taken verbatim. We can change them around a bit. So you need to be telling people this is coming down the line. A lot of people I deal with just won't do this, and it drives me crazy. But they should. They should. If you want your book to be a success, you need to be doing lots of little ideas going out each day with people. So they're getting little bit pockets of value, and they're thinking it's also marketing your book by it just is. You delivering value, little bits of it all the time. That's what you do in your LinkedIn post. That's what other people I follow do as well. Like posts. Now, there's value coming out each day.
Yeah, when I write on LinkedIn, it's with an idea. I'm going to share an idea, and I'm going to see how that in that format is being received, whether it resonates or not, with a view of this will later become part of something else. I haven't been on LinkedIn as much because it's not because I don't have the content. I could put out enough content anytime. It's the engagement that's needed. And so I'm busy with other things at the moment. But I've been frustrated the last couple of weeks because I haven't had the chance to write. Because I do this, that's twice a week. I've only been on LinkedIn 2 or 3 times a week because of the time it takes. But I'm like, I want to write these ideas.
Are you writing them down? Or are you just taking heed of them?
No, I've got so many.
No, just honestly, just put a keyword down so as they.
Yeah, use Apple Notes. And so many of mine come from comments. I comment on someone else's and I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I need to write a post about that. And I've got probably hundreds of idea starters that I want to write as posts and different ways of explaining things. I feel that there's a time when an idea comes and you can capture a bit of it, but you have to have the right energy and be in the right mood to be able to write that. Okay, so if someone's looking for you to, or someone's looking to write a book and maybe they don't want to go through all the work themselves and they want to find out what that would be like and what would be involved, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Just send me a message. A while ago, I did a little PDF called Should You Write a Business Book? And it just goes through the most typical questions people ask me, really. It saves me time and it gives them a glimpse of me, really. And the very first thing is saying, you don't have to write a book at all. You don't. And people say, everybody else is doing it. Fine, let them do your own thing, really. But if people really do want to think about a book, then these are the kind of ideas you need to be thinking about, really. For instance, just silly example, people come with revenge books and that's a bad idea. Oh, somebody's wronged them and they want to get it out in print. Oh, wow, gosh, we're all going to be in lawsuits forever here. I get people with quite tragic stories, really. often quite successful people as well. All people from terrible backgrounds and awful things have been done to them, even though they're quite successful now. Those books can actually work because they can be like journey books that showing how they came to business success and what they've learned along the way. But people need to think very carefully about writing them because it's going to be emotionally grueling for them and for me, actually. I want people to think about things. Do you really want to do it, really? It's going to be time. It's going to be cost. It's going to be a lot of effort. And you need to think, why am I doing it? There should be a return on investment. There should be. But if people don't market their books, there won't be because nobody will know you've got a book. I'm just trying to get people to go through the basics because with anything, it's very often it's the basics we get wrong. We're so clever and so quick and we're so astute that we shoot past the basics. We're sprinting down the road, but it's the wrong road. Or we forgot there's 3 wheels in the car instead of 4. So I guess I start with them, just send them a little PDF and say, I think it's about a 10-minute read or something. It's a few thousand words. Gives them a chance to think, do I like what this guy's saying, really? Because I'm very blunt with people. I haven't got the patience to sugarcoat things. You want to do things fun, you don't. That's okay as well.
It makes for an easier life. It's too valuable to spend it on. We've reached this stage where so many people are writing books that it's become easier to write books. And I think there's a lot of people I've seen who have very shallow knowledge. It's not something that they've really done. But there's all these gurus who are saying, you don't need to have done this. You can still make money for it. I remember being in a group, and it was in this group of very expensive course that basically you could sell high-priced courses or something. I never joined it, but I was in the Facebook group that saw it, and they would show people on their journey. And I remember this girl she was like very early 20s, and she was writing, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then she was like sharing all in public what she was doing. And she go, oh, I've been on a dating site. I can give dating advice. And I remember her then later on, oh, wow, this process works. She said, I was on a call last night with this woman and she's paid me her life savings and she's going to pay like £1,000 a month. And basically sold for £5,000 a 3-month coaching thing for this woman who believed that's what she needed to get, that she was going to get in a happy relationship. Now, this girl had no basis other than the fact she'd been on dating sites. And I see this a lot where people have, oh yeah, I've done that. And they don't really, because the other thing that I've seen is someone's been in a unhappy relationship and they go, oh, I turned my marriage around. And so you can do the same, but your circumstances were the same. And just the fact that what worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. It's a bit like in the gold rush, everyone's selling digging equipment and whatever. And there's so many gurus saying you can make a fortune and you don't need to be an expert, but you need to know a little. You need to have a little bit. I think mastery is important too. But there's so many people that are like, oh, I've done this, I could do that, and never really gone through the process of figuring out what they have to teach and how it works in different markets, which goes back to the kind of research is very specific. And we can't necessarily extrapolate from that to generalize. And I think there is a pattern of people who writing books to sell their products, but without really having the depth of knowledge to really write a good book.
I would completely agree. I think we live in the age of the instant expert. Instant experts on everything, which is a concept I would completely repudiate, really. For that lady taking, if it was the woman's life savings or a huge amount of money, to me, that's not ethical doing that, really. I have no problem with high-priced courses, I should say. I had a client who he charged, was going to go up from $3,000 to $5,000 for a particular course, but it was to get a professional qualification. And over the period of somebody's lifetime, he reckoned they'd get roughly $500,000 more if they had this qualification than not. And he guaranteed as long as you stuck with him, you would get it, and quickly too. No problem with Sean charging that at all. Good on the guy, because he was saying this will do it, really. So it's not the money, but the two things, ability, is it affordable to the person? He wouldn't have taken the life savings. He wouldn't have touched with a barge pole. It's got to be affordable. Are you actually going to deliver and help them get the results? And his case, he did, because the guy was an ethical bloke, really. So, but they charged a lot of money for nothing.
Yeah, the bit that really stuck, it was Christmas. And she'd go, yay, happy Christmas to me. I can now have a great Christmas. And it was purely because she'd sold someone who she didn't really have anything to sell. But yeah, so I suppose it goes back to is it the Dunning-Kruger,
Oh God, yeah, yeah, yeah.
where the real people who really have knowledge don't think that they have something,
Yep.
and then a lot of the people who have nothing think they have. So
Yes.
I think that's the point I'm trying to get at, that I think what you want is people who have deep knowledge but maybe have a lot of doubt and
Yep. Yep.
not knowing how to market themselves. But we're in a world, people with so much shallow knowledge are learning to market themselves more and more effectively. And often, yeah, it's not the price of the course, it's the value of the course. And
Oh,
often the high price is used as a marker for something that isn't worth it, but just because it has good marketing.
totally. There was a self-development course called, was it Delphin, I think, way back, late 80s, early 90s. And there were different levels and everybody was pushing up to the next level. And it got to, I can't remember, it was up that $45,000. It was ridiculous. And the whole thing was just a crock. I thought it was a crock. Really?
Mm.
What? 25 than this. It was this notion that if you got to the next level, got to the next level, got to the next level, got to the next level. And it's just silly. If what the person's getting is making a difference, then fine. But if you Dunning-Kruger just applies so much to our time, it just, we live in this world now. And ironically, the poet Yeats got there before them. He wrote, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. He just nailed it. Because the people who are terrible, they're brilliant at marketing because they're out there all the time and they believe, what's the thing? The sincere man believes his own propaganda or something, a bit cynical. They're shallow enough to believe it while they're saying it.
Yeah, there is something in that. Often in business, it's the person with the most conviction that is the most effective because it's that conviction.
They're effective at promoting themselves.
Mm.
Whether they're effective at anything else, another matter. I've known a lot of people in business who had stellar reputation, but it was all on cost reduction. So they go into a company, just chop everything out. The profit and loss, they go through the flaming roof. Then they go to the next company, rinse and repeat. It's what I call ice flow managers. They'd leave the ice flow as it was sinking because all the company the people would be destroyed. They'd just be destroyed. The intellectual property in people's brains would have gone right out the window. And year 2, year 3, year 4, the company would sink. But they could say they got the result in year one guys, and they had huge careers out of this. But did they do any good? I would say they destroyed those companies. I would say they absolutely destroyed them.
Wasn't that what Jack Welch did? Is basically got everyone to cut costs, cut everything, and they massaged the figures for years and years until he left, and then someone else had to pick up the pieces.
It's what I could have done. I could have done it as well, but I didn't. I did it a proper way. I spent ages and ages and ages with the people and trying to get them going. It's viscous, just trying to get them going in the right direction. But when you get them going in the right direction, wow, they really take off and it will last. It will endure. So nobody has to leave. There's no cost reduction, but you will save money and you will make money and you will get profits which will endure because the people are aligned to it. But it's a damn sight harder to do. It's just a damn sight harder to do. So it's far easier to go down the cost reduction way. But
and depending on how you're measured, and which goes back to the real problem of metrics. It's been fascinating. I really appreciate your time, and it's wonderful to listen to your journey and the ideas, and it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's lovely to meet the person behind the post because the one thing I get from you is that you're out there questioning, querying, and trying to make sense of things day after day after day. And you're not the only person. There are other people as well, really. It's not just you. There's other people. A lot of them, the people on your podcast, actually. We're all making our little journeys. We're all on our little journeys. And maybe collectively, our little journeys can become something more than us.